Summary of Freak the Mighty by Rodman Philbrick. Max says that he didn't have a brain until he met Freak, and the two of them became Freak the Mighty. When Max went to daycare for the first time many years ago, he was called Kicker because he would kick people. Max's grandparents, Grim and Graham, thought that babysitting would be good for him, but all it did was give Max his first look at Freak, who he remembers as looking fierce. Freak's legs were fixed with metal braces, and he would use his sticks to hit other kids. Freak showed Max years later that he can remember anything, whether it really happened or not. Max remembers for sure hearing Grim say that Max doesn't just like him, but that Max is like him, so Max might hurt them. Graham told Grim to be quiet, and Grim said that Max had big ears. Max looked at his ears to see if that was what made him look like Max's father, Kenny. Max is growing an inch a day during the summer before 8th grade, and he can hardly keep track of his feet. When he gets bored in his basement bedroom, which he calls the Down Under, he leaves the house. Outside, he sees Freak, who is shorter than 3 feet, giving orders to workers. Freak points a stick at Max when he sees him and tells the Earthling to say who he is. Max runs back to the land down under because he is scared. Max thinks for a while, and then he goes back outside to watch Freak. He sees Freak in the backyard, trying in vain to get something out of a tree. Even when he stands in a wagon, he isn't tall enough to reach. Max walks over to the tree and pulls something small and bright off of it. Freak says that it's an artificial bird called an ornithopter. They play with the bird until its rubber band breaks. Then, Max pulls Freak's wagon to his house, and the three of them go to the Down Under. Freak tells Max all about King Arthur and why he calls his mom Guinevere. It's a play on the name of the Lady Guinevere from Arthurian tale. He tells Max that the first robots were heroes, and Max tries to hide the fact that he doesn't like to read. When Gwen sees Max, she quickly takes Freak away from the boys when they hear her calling for Freak. Later, Graham tells Max that Gwen called. Gwen is sorry that she hurt Max's feelings and wants him to come to dinner. Max says that he knows Gwen was just scared of him, but Graham says that Gwen isn't scared of him. Max agrees to go against his will. Gwen says she's sorry, and then she says that Max looks just like his dad, Kenny. Max tells the reader that the only reason it matters that he looks like his father is because Kenny is in jail and everyone knows what he did. That night, dinner at Freak's is fun, and when Max gets home, he's so happy he starts crying. A few days later, Grim and Graham agree that Max can go with Freak to see the 4th of July fireworks. They seem worried that someone will step on Freak, but Max says they should be more worried about the people who are drinking beer. Max is right. The neighborhood bully Tony D tries to pick on Max and Freak while he is drunk. Max puts Freak on his shoulders so that he can see the fireworks. Freak stays there after the fireworks, and when Tony D's friends come after them, Freak leads Max into a nearby pond and waves down a police car. The police help the boys get away, and Freak tells them they are Freak the Mighty. Grim acts strangely when he gets home, and he gives Max a cup of coffee. He says nice things about Max for saving Freak, but Max tells the reader that it was Freak's brain that saved him. Freak wakes Max up every morning for the rest of the summer so they can go on quests. Freak says one day that he is going on a journey to the Far East. He rides on Max's shoulders for miles through a fancy neighborhood that Freak says is full of castles. When they get to the fortress, which is a hospital, Freak tells them that he visits the medical study center every few months. They are getting him ready for a transfer of a bionic body. Max finds this very scary, but he can tell that Freak cares about it. Later that summer, Freak tells them about another treasure hunt, but this one must be done at 3 a.m. because the wealth is in a storm drain and the location is a secret. Max goes with Freak to the storm drain against his will. There, he helps Freak get a purse that Tony D stole and threw down the drain. A woman called Loretta Lee has an ID, which they find. Loretta Lee lives in the apartment houses that everyone calls the New Testaments, which are across the mill pond. Max shouldn't go there, but Freak says they have to if they want to finish their goal. When they get to the apartment, the door opens before the boys can even knock. Inside are a thin blonde woman and a big, scarred man. Max knows they are in big trouble because the man is Iggy Lee, the boss of a dangerous biker gang. Iggy tries to scare Max and Freak, but Loretta doesn't know that Max is Kenny Kane's son until Iggy tells her. Iggy doesn't think Kenny will spend the rest of his life in jail, and he doesn't want Kenny to find out that he messed with Max, so he lets Max and Freak go. When Max thinks about going to school, he feels scared. The adults decide that it would be good for Freak to have a helper, so Max will go to Freak's classes instead of the learning disabled classes. Things are going well until Mrs. Donnelly tries to get Max to talk in front of the class in English. Kids pick on Max until Freak and Max join together to become Freak the Mighty. Max is happy, and Freak leads the rest of the class in chanting Freak the Mighty. Mrs. Donnelly sends them to the office of the school's head teacher. Freak seems to charm Mrs. Addison, so she lets the boys go. Max finds out in October that all the talk about Friday the 13th is true. Even though things have been going well at school, Freak has taught Max to read, but Max still says he can't write. Mrs. Addison sends a worrisome note to Max's room. He thinks she will put him back in classes for people with learning disabilities, but she tells him that Kenny is getting out on parole. Max screams that he doesn't want to hear it, puts his hands over his ears, and curls up in the corner. Max thinks he hurt the nurse because she is crying when he wakes up, but he doesn't remember hurting her. Max's mom, Mrs. Addison, tells him that he won't have to see Kenny. Then, during lunch, Freak stops breathing, and he has to go to the hospital. When Mrs. Addison tells Max he's had a rough day, Max points out that Freak's day was worse. Mrs. Addison says Max will be all right. Things go back to normal until just before Christmas, when Max hears Grim and Graham screaming, which they never do. Graham says Grim can't get a gun because Kenny could break in, steal it, and use it to kill everyone. Graham thinks that the police will protect them, but Grim says that Annie couldn't be protected by the cops. Later, Grim has a secret conversation with Max. He tells Max that since Kenny is out on parole, he got a protection order against Kenny so that he can't come near the house. Grim agrees to stay near the house for a few days, but Max tells him to get a gun no matter what Graham says. Grim, Graham, and Max celebrate Christmas Eve with Gwen and Freak. Max is having a great time until the middle of the night, when Kenny wakes him up with a cold wind and a big hand on his face. Max is scared when Kenny takes him away. Max thinks Kenny doesn't need armor because he's already strong enough to get what he wants. In the Testaments, Kenny shows Max how to get to Iggy and Loretta's room. He yells at Iggy and forces him to make him and Max burgers because he let Loretta drink. Iggy is scared, and Max can tell. Iggy then takes Max and Kenny to an old lady's room while she is away for the holidays. Max makes the mistake of looking at the door, which makes Kenny want to tie Max up. Kenny and Max sleep for a while, but Kenny wakes Max up later and Max says that he didn't kill anyone, people just think he's mean because he's big. He says that Grim and Graham are bad people for locking him up and not letting him see Max. He swears on the Bible that he didn't kill Max's mother, Annie. Max stays up the rest of the night and tries not to think about the horrible things that happened. When Loretta brings them cold pizza in the morning, Kenny wakes up right away. When they see a police car, Kenny decides they need to hide somewhere else while Iggy gets them a gun and a car. Kenny takes Max to a burned-out building, helps him down the slippery stairs, and ties Max to an old boiler while he goes to find Iggy. Max thinks he sees and hears things, but then Loretta Lee falls down the stairs to free Max. She cuts the ropes that are holding Max's hands and feet together, but Kenny comes out of nowhere and chokes her. Max feels like he's 4 years old again and that Kenny is killing Annie in front of him. He tries to hit Kenny and screams that Kenny killed Annie in his memory. This takes Kenny's attention away from Max, so he starts to choke him. Freak then comes in through the basement window with a squirt gun and shoots Kenny in the face with what he says is sulfuric acid. Max grabs Freak and runs out of the building with him. When they get outside, they see police officers and Iggy Lee. Kenny is caught by the police, and they take Loretta to the hospital. Max has to tell the police station over and over again what happened, and he doesn't want to have to appear in court one day. When school starts up again, Mrs. Donnelly puts the newspaper picture of Max and Freak on the bulletin board. Freak tells her to keep it up even though someone is drawing mustaches on it. Max doesn't have to witness in the end. Kenny pleads guilty to all charges and will spend a long time in jail. Even though this seems to be a happy ending, Max is still afraid that he will turn out like Kenny. Freak's birthday party is right after school gets out for the summer. It's also Freak the Mighty's first birthday, so it's a double celebration. Freak's health is getting worse, so the party is small. Freak gets a computer that will let him go to school over the phone. This confuses Max because he knows Freak is going to get a bionic body and won't have to miss school ever again. Freak has a seizure at the party, and he is taken to the hospital. Max can't stand to leave Freak alone, so he takes the ornithopter and walks to the hospital the next day. Gwen and Dr. Spivak let Max see Freak for a short time. Freak looks like he's getting smaller, and he's hooked up to a lot of tubes and monitors. Freak gives Max a blank book and asks Max to write Freak the Mighty's story in it. Freak is getting his robotic operation tomorrow, so he won't have time to write it himself. When Max goes back to the hospital the next day, he finds out that Freak has died. Max loses control, and before the police finally catch him, he breaks through several glass doors. Max and Dr. Spivak are sitting down, and Max tells Dr. Spivak how Freak talked about his bionic operation. At first, Max thinks that Dr. Spivak told Freak a lie about the operation, and then he thinks that Freak told Max a lie about the operation. Dr. Spivak tells Max that Freak probably told the story to give himself hope, since he has known for a long time that he wouldn't live long. Max stays sad for a long time. He runs into Loretta Lee around Christmas. Loretta says that Gwen and her new boyfriend now live in California. Loretta tells Max that doing nothing is boring when she finds out that he isn't doing anything. Max starts to think about it, so he takes out the blank notebook Freak gave him. Max thinks at first that he can't write, but he starts writing down Freak the Mighty's story and keeps doing so until spring. Now that Max has written the story, he thinks he can remember things well enough to read some books.
About the author. Born in Boston, Massachusetts, Philbrick grew up in New Hampshire. As a kid, he liked to think and write a lot. He started writing stories when he was 12 and finished a book when he was 16. Philbrick went to college and studied English at the University of New Hampshire, but he never finished. Philbrick worked as a boat builder and a longshoreman when he was young. These jobs gave him ideas for his 2004 book for young adults, The Young Man and the Sea. Even though he started out writing mysteries and thrillers for adults, his popularity took off when he released Freak the Mighty, his first book for young adults, in 1993. Since then, Philbrick's most popular and well-reviewed works have been his books for young adults. His wife, Lynn Harnett, who died in 2012, worked with him on several books for young people.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.